Inviting you to come back So we're delighted at the energy. And so we'd like one representative of the group, without, I'm sure there's a lot to say about process, but we'd just like to sort of share what you decide, what your decision was as a group of how we should respond to this challenge. So let's start over here.
Okay, we identified a micro and macro issues, actually present and future. The immediate present, you have to do something for these kids. And so the community, those who are willing to get together to create, in lieu of what the school board wouldn't do, some kind of form of sanctuary for the kids. One, the larger issue, some form of to change public perceptions and ideals, to work on community education. The way to frame it, however you do it, is red-blooded, patriotic, constitutional affirming Americans cannot allow Jews, blacks, Christians, Muslims, or gay people to be. They have the right life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And if you're against that, you're against the American people. That will force those people to choke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ditto pretty much, but we talked
go for the
about.
jugular.
But that's also a two-pronged thing, the urgency that all the children need to be safe. And so we talked about leveling it out. Okay, so someone mentioned, you said, someone used as a trump card, that's the wrong word.
You have to change the word out.
It took me too long to get there.
The bullying that happens to fat people. And believe it or not, he was a fat child.
My name is Michael, and I was a fat child.
Oh, my God.
That, all children need to feel safe. And so that we could create from amongst us a sanctuary, that they're not going to do it at the school, that the interreligious group could do that. And that who needs to feel safe, and if others need to also, to figure out a way to do that in an urgent way, because you've got suicides going on.
Yep.
That's going to...
But also just a little bit to comment on what you said, part of the point being here that we recognize that there might be representatives in the council who do not favor some kind of statutes around affirming gay, but that we can all affirm the dignity of every human being and the safety of our children. So those groups within the interfaith who want to establish a sanctuary, we would hope that you would support us, even if you can't step in and say, we're going to do this too. But because you can support making sure that children are loved in the image of God.
And then the second prong would, each group would be working on education in their own setting.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes.
So we discussed many of those details and would support those, but we went more on the process side of what was going to happen. We talked about there might be, if everyone wasn't at the meeting the night before, there might need to be a little information given at the meeting. Step two is, regardless of how long the group has known each other, some relationship building would be a good thing to do. I threw in this question that I love from Public Conversations Project, which would go around the room, just ask each of the leaders present to say, tell us something about you or your life experience that would help us understand why you're here this morning. So you get a lot of personal information and less about politics and beliefs, more just about individuals. It sort of builds relationships quickly. But then we talked about, and then opening up to say, okay, so we need to build a stronger sense of support and consciousness around this issue in our community. So let's talk about how we might do that. And we talked about some of the ideas that were here presented. We talked about trying to bring like the ADL No Room for Hate program to the district. We talked about going back to our own congregations and doing the kind of work that you described. And we talked about just the leaders getting together and confidentially, spending the year doing their own work together as a group. So we mostly just talked about process and opening that up for the group to figure out.
Excellent.
But also opening it up, as you said, to other children who are at bullying risk because of other kinds of issues, race or size.
Yeah, I mean, the ideas that you described, we talked about most of those too.
Great. You guys, next.
So basically, I mean, it's the same idea of creating a sanctuary outside of the school system. And I was also wondering if like this issue of homosexuality in an interfaith group is one of the issues that you need to agree not to agree on to some extent, because, I mean, yeah.
We also talked about maybe using some text study to build relationships and discussion, and maybe coming to, agree to disagree, but at least having an understanding of each other.
Got it. Thank you. Screw.
Yeah, so we came up with sort of three main problems. But we all agreed pretty quickly that the most important thing is the kids themselves and making sure that they are in as safe a place as possible. The two of us had sort of some concrete kinds of connections that we would reach out to and try to connect them with. One was the network of monks that you're connected to, and my uncle actually wrote a book about being fired from a school for being out as gay, and also a book about teen suicide. And he lived in San Francisco at the time. So I would definitely make sure he came by. Eric Rufus.
Networking.
So that was the first problem, is to make sure that they're safe and to bring in people that can help. The second was, in Al's words, just to make sure that the people who are opposing this know that the world is watching. And to ensure that they don't think they're getting a free pass with the views, because a lot of people, I think they know deep down that what they're doing is hateful, and they think that they can just get away with it, but bringing in sort of a magnifying glass. And the third was to reach out to the individual powerful folks, whether it's the school board members themselves, the superintendent, and making sure that some behind the scenes work is done to try and move them on this issue as much as possible. And then if that doesn't work, what we said is that we would consider legal frameworks that we could.
Great, thank you.
So I want to ask one question before we report. What time of year did this happen?
May.
May, good, exactly. So, being impatient, and for me at least, I've created 2 schools in my lifetime, a Jewish community day school where I lived, and then a school in New York City for adult immigrants and refugees. We would create an alternative school to start in September. We would do this within a week of that time because we would be so frightened for the kids. We would be so furious and so impatient. We would have all of the process afterwards in the response to the school. The school would be a school for gay and lesbian kids and their allies and all of the other issues of people who were endangered in the school system. We would open in September. We would expect there would be a lot of education happening through that summer. We would worry about legislation at some other time after we had put into practice what was needed in that moment. We would all sign up as gay ourselves, just as you had done about being Muslim, and we would then hope that people would, maybe through education, but maybe through having a direct connection with someone who is gay, whom they liked, who was willing to speak out, would make the difference and cut through some of the attitudes. That's what we would do.
What did you do?
Don't feel jealous.
No ending, no ending.
Yeah, with over 20 years of hindsight.
Where were you when we needed?
I was in place. Flunky school.
So there was a sense of real emergency,
Yeah.
of course. So we met the very next day. And we did fill in, you know, the relationship issue is a good point. We had really, you know, at that point, we had been together as a core group. You know, there were people who come and go, but we had strong relationships, really strong relationships, and we trusted each other. And we invited the people who were opposed from their place of faith, of belief, of faith, the Catholics that were there, we knew, and the Mormons, the Baha'i, and the Muslims were the main group that, you know, clearly hadn't come. So we filled them in on what happened, gave them a full report of the meeting, bleary-eyed report of the meeting, teary-eyed report of the meeting, and with stories, you know, our own sense of what happened and side stories. And then we said, what do you know, said there are lives at stake here. And we said, we have to do something today, not tomorrow, not next week, today. And we asked them, what are you comfortable with? What do you suggest? How can we respond to this emergent situation? And they said that we had to form our own sanctuary committee, all of you. And they said that they weren't sure that they could participate, but they would not. Our agreement in our group is that when we're taking any position like this, we have to all agree. And we were afraid that this would splinter the group. And this is a question of, you know, we've had other issues in which it was an issue, the issue and the integrity of the group, where it's, you know, we're in the balance. And they said, these children are more important than anything, and we support this group taking a position, even though we may not be able to participate. And we said, thank you, thank you, thank you. We went directly to the office of the superintendent, and we said we were forming a sanctuary group. We had legal counsel. We lined our, you know, we informed all of our communities first that we were doing this. Everybody supported it, and I also called the ADL, and I had conferred with them before, and they actually had a representative at the meeting, so they knew what had happened. And we mobilized other, what are the folks, the parents, PFLAG. All of our connections, the groups who had been in, who attended our WOW services over the years, all of our allies, we called them, we said, we need your support. We mobilized far, you know, as strongly as we could.
You got that word to the press.
And they immediately went, you know, public. Press releases called our contacts at the newspaper, said we need an article tomorrow. And we did. You know, so, and then?
A little foggy on the timing, but it was just Dan and I. And so we told the superintendent's office that we wanted a meeting. And they responded and said, absolutely. So it brought in their entire hierarchy to meet with the two of us. And we just laid it on the table. You are in trouble. We are not stopping. We're going to stay in front of the press. The situation is intolerable. And after a fair amount of clarification, I'd say in a 45-minute period, I think there was almost a sigh of relief on their part. And they said, thank you. We've been under the gun of the evangelicals for so long. Finally now, with your voices, we can position ourselves to say, we're here for the good of the students. We're listening to the whole community. You know, we didn't know you existed.
And they, and they said, we will reverse the decision. We will take, they were scared. There were people among them that were really frightened that as faith community leaders, we were gonna encroach on their turf. That was the other part.
Right.
And he made a the superintendent, together with a couple of the, vice, chairs of the Unified School District, made a decision. They called the school board, and they said they called it the Climate Committee. And our demand was that it be absolutely focused on LGBT issues, but embrace the wider bullying issues in the area. And that we said, we will only accept this if we have representation if we have a presence on that committee. And we also got their approval or support. They came up with a budget to hire the ADL to come in and do programs at high schools and middle schools for parents, faculty first, meetings with faculty, trainings for faculty and staff, administration, and then open forums with parents and other, interested parties. And in September, the school came back. School opened at the high schools and middle schools with a day of celebrating diversity, with videotapes shown to all of middle school and high school students about bullying, some really good materials. ADL really helped with this. And it was very explicitly spoken, the LGBT issue was right at the front. And I wouldn't say that we're, fast forward, 10 years, 12 years, we're not yet where we want to be, but there has been a complete shift on this issue in our area. So, yeah.
Did you have to raise the specter of legal action when you originally met with the school board so that they could have a big leaf to hide behind, or was that not necessary?
No, wasn't necessary. They were scared. They were relieved. They were relieved, which was so shocking to us.
Right.
That was the most surprising thing. But you have a group of people, and they were community leaders, and they were both relieved and they were put on notice. They were concerned. They were concerned that they'd lose control of this issue, and that it would come to faith communities.
That it would come to,
Faith communities.
well, what was your leverage? What was your strongest leverage? So what?
It sounds like the school system.
What were they afraid of?
that?
Well, they were afraid that things would happen, that they would, that we would, in the sanctuary committee that we had, that we would be doing things that would impact them that they had no control over.
If they had known about you before the initial meeting, do you think the meeting would have gone differently? I mean, what do you think it would have been like?
It sounds like the school board was in control rather than the education.
Yeah, it was a political issue between the board and the Unified School District. And the Unified School District because the board had the support of the evangelical. They had it.
So is that a political, is that a political?
Yes.
You vote.
Oh, they're elected.
They're
They're elected
elected,
officials.
right.
But
So
so how,
who's, so is the school district subordinate to them in some way?
Yes.
They can hire and fire.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clarifying the politics.
I wanted then, so that was my question is how, having been an executive director beholden to a board, so when you went to meet with them, and the superintendent says we're gonna reverse the decision, how could they say that without first conferring with the board? And then how did they make that happen within the board?
There were some calls made. And basically, we were near an election. And the superintendent said, I will use all of my power And we will, we know we have the support in the community. And in fact, even with the school board capitulated, and they still were, the most outspoken people who were anti-gay were not reelected.
There's also,
So-
there's also the summer.
Yeah.
Summer,
In
yeah.
the summer, it's quieter in the summer.
Well, we know it was in the fall, the election was in the fall.
No, but the summer was
Yes.
when you could leverage the change. because of
We
the-
got so much press coverage around this. And we really there were community forums, I mean, there were things, people who were supportive of these folks who hadn't spoken up in the past were speaking up. They were empowered. You know what, we have, clearly we're our 3 case studies are not next year. But we'd like to just give you sort of we're gonna do this really quickly and not have the luscious process, we don't have the time, and we apologize, we misjudged that a bit. So just gonna give you the quick, I'll take one, you take the other, you wanna do it that way? Or we'll both talk on this. So background for the second issue is that in 2004, a group representing 30,000 members of indigenous tribes of the Ecuadorian Amazon came to our town to talk to the corporate leadership of Swivl, which is in our town. You should know that Chevron is the largest employer in the state of California and the largest benefactor in the state.
Really?
State, yes. So a little background. There was a lawsuit that had been kicking around in the U.S. courts for a decade, was finally ruled to be the jurisdiction of Ecuador, around the fact that actually Texaco had built, had won the rights from the government of Ecuador to drill in the Amazonian, along the Ecuadorian Amazon. So they had drilled for oil and they put in the oil pipelines. And of course there was a lot of graft and corruption. But Chevron had bought Texaco after there had been widespread damage in the Amazon. Tremendous pollution of an area the size of the Bay Area, if that means anything to you.
Now the largest oil spill on the planet.
Yeah, it was just horrific. Horrific environmental damage and terrible human cost, diseases, mostly affecting women and children, huge spike. They had never had cancer, any reported cases of cancer, an epidemic of cancers and diseases. And so anyway, the delegation came to talk to the CEO of Chevron, a man by the name of David O'Reilly at the time, and he refused to talk to the delegation on the basis that there was ongoing litigation. So they appealed to our interfaith group. We housed them, and we arranged local gatherings, one right across from Chevron, from the Chevron headquarters, a large gathering. We established a group. I don't know if you remember at the time, but Chevron had this huge campaign called Chevron Cares.
Yeah.
There's all this, their work with the environment. So we established a group called the San Ramon Valley Cares in partnership with Amazon Watch. We were invited to come down to the Amazon to bear witness. So Steve and another associate, a Lutheran minister, Margareta Dahl Johansson, and the head of the local AFL-CIO, and myself were the delegation. We mobilized humanitarian care, went to all the hospitals, found out what their clinics needed down there, brought tons of supplies, and went down with Amazon, arranged by Amazon Watch. We did 7 days in the most pristine Amazon rainforest left in all of South America. It happens to be a reserve, the Cuyabeno Reserve. We spent just to appreciate what the before, and then we spent a week in the most polluted, largest oil spill on land in the world. And we had a blog, before there was a blog, with the local newspaper, the largest newspaper. Before we left, you have to understand that our communities and the other interfaith folks who didn't go supported this. We all have Chevron executives in our congregations.
Yes.
So this was very complex, because when we started, even when we agreed to house these folks, we got tremendous blowback. And they said, you're risking our jobs, you're risking, So we reached out to Chevron and said, we have no interest in demonizing you. We're going down to bear witness as people of faith and labor. They wouldn't talk to us. Now, once the articles when we were in the Amazon, and the articles started appearing in the newspaper, I got a Western Union telegram in the middle of the Amazon. We need to talk. from David O'Reilly. So anyway, we had this very powerful, I should say, that after we met the delegation, the Parliament of the Indigenous Peoples, representing Indigenous Peoples, we spoke at the gathering. We were on our way to Coca, which is the capital of the Ecuadorian Amazon, to meet with a fellow named Angel Shingre, who was an outspoken journalist and an activist against the oil, against Chevron and other aspects. We spoke on other issues. We were going to meet with him, and on our way to meet with him, we found out he was assassinated. And we showed up in Coca. We met his wife and 6 children. It was an impromptu memorial service. 10,000 people showed up in this small town. And we felt shattered. They assured us that he probably would have been killed anyway. I remember one fellow saying to me, one of the indigenous folks said, you can go over the border to Colombia, and for $20 you can have anyone killed. That's the cost of life. So they said, but we felt responsible. We felt our role was, all of a sudden, this was incredibly serious, but it hit a whole other level with Angel's assassination. We saw some things. We met with the judge who was litigating the case, who himself had stomach cancer. We saw young people going into rivers. You have to understand that in the Amazon, everything is water, all the time. You travel on water. Land is like, it's here and there, but it's all water. And when we were walking with our guides, we all had ponchos on our hips. And when our guide said, now, if you didn't put your poncho on within 8 seconds, the skies would open up and I couldn't see Steve from this, that's how the rain, the water is everywhere all the time. And there was a huge area where there was no potable water. We saw children go into streams where there were oil slicks on the streams. They had to move the oil slicks aside to bathe. We went into clinics where we met with people who were dying and sick with diseases, skin diseases and cancers. And
children being born without brains.
We saw
bowed legs, and women are menstruating 17 days every month.
We saw,
unheard of.
yeah, we made a video, we shot a video while we were there. We visited schools, we spoke at clinics. We delivered, when we delivered the medical supplies, these clinics were like, they were weeping, they were just, anyway, it was very enormously powerful. We came back, we did endless interviews, we held public forums, we edited the videotape, showed the tape. We were invited to come to Chevron. We had series of meetings with the Chevron
Corporate responsibility team.
We got very involved. I'll say one thing. we had to sign statements before a meeting that anything, we couldn't say one word about what was said in meetings. But we were in a meeting, one meeting with an executive, vice president of Chevron, and the head of South American operations. And at one point, I said, because their position was that the government was responsible, and Chevron was deep pockets, and they were just trying to, take Chevron for what they were worth. And I said, I looked across the table to the head of the South American operations, the guy who worked at Chevron his whole life. And I said, I get that the government is complicit. I get that they have responsibility. Are you willing to tell me that Chevron, as accepting the liability of Texaco, has no responsibility whatsoever? And he said, well, I wouldn't say no responsibility. I wouldn't say no, 6 words. 6 words he said. And there was a frost in that room. And we all turned, because the executive vice president, I thought his head was going to explode. He was so furious. Now, we had no right to share a word of what was said there. The next day, this man who had worked his whole life for Chevron was transferred to a small town in Africa, demoted, crushed, ended his career for those 6 months.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
This fear,
Yeah, we're out of time.
we're at time.
We're out of time. I
This
just,
fear is so deep that there is a corporate gag order on all the retired employees of Chevron.
yeah. So, I didn't say that our work in Quito, Quito's the capital of Ecuador, we arranged, the head of the Council of Churches of South America came to a gathering that we, Amazon Watch helped us to arrange, and told us that it was the first recorded interfaith meeting in the history of South America.
Wow.
First recorded interfaith gathering in the history. South America is very Catholic controlled, and we had some amazing experiences and incredible opportunities to meet extraordinary people. We got very involved in this. We're out of time. I wish I could tell you the whole story. We had been working on it, we did a lot of work within our own communities.
We did, we paid a huge price. I think we both had people, I certainly did, who would walk by me in casual conversations, it just never stopped. I mean, cocktail passing by saying, watch your back.
It was very challenging.
And we bring these people to the indigenous would come up on delegations. We bring them to worship.
Yeah.
And have them participate. And so one time I was moved to say to the congregation, I said, now what am I supposed to do? I said, their presence here is very uncomfortable if I speak about this. Some of us are really over the edge. I said, on the other hand, if I don't speak, they die. I said, I think I'll speak. Yeah.
We had one of the most famous restaurants in our area, where they grow all their own vegetables in a garden, and very, very wonderful restaurant. They did a photo exhibit, and when we brought another delegation, and within 2 months the restaurant went out of business because Chevron told everyone, not only our own people, but spread the word in the community. They boycotted the restaurant.
Did you affect change in the end?
We certainly affected change in our area, and the way it was talked about, the way we put a human face on this issue that was just an issue of this wonderful corporation being targeted by these indigenous folks. That the story is Chevron. We changed the narrative completely in the area. We were able to raise funds, and at the end of the day, local indigenous folks received the Goldman Award. This is the local environmental Oscars, with hundreds of thousands of dollars of support and millions of dollars of support. They're loyal. We did a lot to help shift the conversation. And at the end of the day, You know, they won in court, of course, it's been appealed, and they may never see a dime. But there were some key points of decision about what we had to do that we were gonna end up into, but it was complex. It was a complex, and ongoing, we're still, we have friends, I've been down to Ecuador 4 times, and we have friends that come up and we house them and support them in every way we can. So it's an issue.
Yes, yes.
Is there any, like, writing you did about it? Can you point us to the blog you wrote at the time?
You know, I don't even know where that, the blog, it appeared in the newspapers. So we did a lot of writing. But that was, I don't know where else that lives.
Interesting question, but I was doing Lex Luthor.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, both my parents are lawyers, that's part of the genesis.
I don't
So,
know.
yeah.
That's an interesting thought. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because
Yeah, no.